Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special Monday edition of Speaking Moistly. With me today is Matt. I'm going to slaughter your last name. Ehret? Ehret?
That's
How do you?
actually pretty
Is that
close,
good? Yeah,
but you're close.
perfect. Well, welcome, Matt. Thank you for joining me. You have a YouTube channel. You went to school in Montreal, right?
For now, I have a YouTube channel. It's
For
only
now,
a
you
matter
have.
of time before I don't have a YouTube channel.
They're
But
coming.
yeah,
They're coming. And in the green room, we were talking about, we're roughly the same age or around the same age. And I was talking about how impactful the shows like Colbert and Stewart were to what I'm doing now. And we were talking about theater of the absurd and like um, the you can't take yourself too seriously covering the complete insanity of what we're living through. And I was saying I wouldn't believe it unless I lived through it. And Matt was saying like, yeah, it's pretty nuts, and you have to kind of laugh. And we were kind of launching off of that. So, what do you think of the madness of what we're living through? Like the ever changing insanity. We got a warning, right? Like the October email. Do you remember the October email saying Canadian life is going to change? Did you see that?
no, I didn't.
Oh no, I covered it a bunch on my show. Okay, so we got this warning saying everything is going to change, but we're seeing rapid changes. Like Canada Day was pretty much verboten. You couldn't have a Canadian flag on the hill.
Yeah, that's a sign that you're a domestic terrorist all of a sudden, that you have a
Yeah,
flag. Yeah.
right. Well, just your skin color is a sign of your domestic terrorism, right? Ties. And so we've got Canada Day being kind of torn down. We've got Trudeau in hidings from some truckers. We've got the inflation, housing crisis, all kind of culminating at once. And people, I remember 2008 because people were crazy about the gas prices, $1.30 a liter, right? And now it's $2 a liter, and people don't say anything because the problems are so much bigger. So, like, how do you make sense of all of this? How do you look at this and go, all right, we're doing this again today?
Yeah. Well, no, I think that it's important, as we were saying, to have a sense of humor in a certain way to stay above the shit show, because it is just so absurdly insane. And I think this is something which you really see at the end of a system.
Yep.
We had a certain period of several decades of pseudo-stability, which you and I were sort of born into, but it was already going into a bad trajectory before we were even born. You know, JFK had already died 20 years or so earlier, 1963.
Yep.
His brother, Bobby, died. Martin Luther King, both 1968. Daniel Johnson Sr. died the same year, 1968, September, here in Quebec. Charles de Gaulle was ousted in 64. And really that was, 69. And that was really it for the anti-Malthusian, anti-technocratic resistance, as far as those who wielded political power and had a moral conscience to risk their lives to defend their principles. That was sort of the end of the real resistance in the transatlantic domain.
Yep.
We had little blips here and there, but nothing to the extent that we had real presidents who wielded, like real statescraft, real high-level power that were resistant. It was always now on the level of congressional, Senate. A few premiers here and there would arise in the 70s and the 80s, some in the 90s, but the resistance got just reduced in power, as what became normal was insane and greater degrees of insanity, of worshiping money, thinking more and more myopically. The idea of greed is good becoming the new ethic that really took over in the 1980s. And we were all told that's just the way the world is. And I remember myself in watching World Vision, these little infomercials when I was a kid, and feeling really bad about these emasculated African children, with bugs on their eyes.
I was just gonna say that. Yes, exactly. The flies would land on their face. My brother would be like, "What? Why?" Like,
I'm like, I live pretty well. I got electricity and running water. Why are all these kids? Thousands are dying of starvation every day. And I got my parents. I was maybe like 7, 8 years old, and I got them to do $1 a day thing, and I had a little pen pal in Colombia. At a certain point we stopped because the pictures we were getting, this kid was like, I was a pretty fat kid, and the kid who we were supporting was fatter than me, and I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, you're like, hold on a second here.
But that
you guys
being
have
said,
McDonald's?
I knew that there was something definitely wrong. And kids, I think, have that instinct that, a more healthy sense that this is wrong. Why would we live so well and have so many kids living in poverty when we have the technology we do? And all of the adults were telling me that's just the way it is.
Mhm.
The best we could hope for would maybe be to give them $1 a day so that they can maybe get a microcredit when they grow up to paint rocks for dollar stores or something,
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing for parents to like champion that idea, or even for like that paradigm to exist, where society has been taught, like, teach a man to fish and he can feed himself forever. You give a man a fish, it's kind of limited. But you're like, just $1 a day, it's just a coffee. You're like, well, hold on a second, can we use that money to teach him to fish? Like,
Yeah,
like
like why not? Yeah, exactly. Why not put a lot of these dollars together and build some infrastructure
to
so that
meaningfully, to build something that can then be used by this generation and the next generation. And like, there's some big questions that I have, and I come into that, like I run into that all the time, and it can't be like, oh man, we just didn't realize that, like, right, it has to be mismanaged almost on purpose. Otherwise, what's happened
that's the thing, right? So that's the thing. It's your choices are either we're that incompetent that we really wanted globalization to do all of these things it promised for like 40 years of like,
Yep.
interconnectivity, cooperation, ending world hunger, and we just, for some reason, we just did it badly and
so badly.
more results,
Yep.
right?
Yeah. And we're going to still keep up
intention.
with the same program that's getting this terrible results. Or, sorry.
Yeah, or it was a remarkable success at getting its objectives accomplished. Maybe globalization was a success, and the point of it was to always get this type of effect of mass depopulation, wars, impoverishment, starvation. Maybe that was always the objective, which didn't just destroy the victim target countries that got to live in either slave labor, cheap labor, or just resources extraction, like all of Africa, but also it destroyed the so-called beneficiary countries too, because the people didn't benefit, our national security didn't benefit from like 50 years of atrophy. We stopped investing in maintaining or improving our infrastructure. We built all of our infrastructure back in the 60s and 70s, and then we stopped. We lost our manufacturing base, so our economic independence was gone as we started extracting our factories to go into cheap labor markets, and we became dependent like a drug addict on influxes of cheap shit from China or Indonesia, to fill Dollaramas, which never should have existed. Like, what, a Dollarama? You're paying, like, look at the absurdity, right? The cost of production of producing, the amount of energy input, manpower, time of using obsolete old ass technology from the 1950s and 60s in sweatshops on the coastal zones of China, halfway around the world. You're gonna like make the shit we used to make there, but now cheaply. Then you're gonna ship it halfway around the world. It's gonna take you 40 days on cargo. The amount of fuel, manpower, when we could have just done a lot of these things at higher quality with good paid jobs here, like we used to. The whole thing is absurd. And it's just that it kind of worked. It kind of maintained a certain air of stability on the surface, but only because we were extracting wealth at greater and greater rates from the outskirts, kind of like the way the Roman Empire maintained stability.
And they were playing, and they were playing with interest rates. So like the basically using the interest rates to control the math of how much money costs to put it in a tolerable area for the population, right? So using the interest rates to game that kind of monetary system to keep it looking like it's, as you said, like it's stable, right? And it doesn't look like it's going to collapse tomorrow or the next day. So people just go, it's not going to collapse. So that stability is now laid bare for, like, everything else is laid bare, gone, right? And so I think that the interesting one of the interesting aspects of this is, as you were saying, this started when Kennedy was shot. This started the process of this, stripping the wealth, stripping the self-sufficiency of the country, stripping the ability to be, to be self-sufficient in manufacturing, but also to be self-sufficient in energy, self-sufficient in governance, right? They slowly did this over a period of time. And you and I were born into this period, like the early 1980s, late 1970s, where they were in the crisis. And like, I don't remember that crisis, but that was a crisis back then. Same crisis as now, the gas and oil crisis, right? Like the embargoes and OPEC and all of that stuff. And so we grew up in a world where just boom after boom after boom, like the boom after the oil thing was solved. And then the 90s in Ontario was pretty awful, but everybody said that was the NDP's fault. And then the 2000s were a big boom. Well, and then Enron before that, and so on and so forth. So we haven't experienced kind of the fallout, but I think it's not all been false. The internet was a big boom, so they could ride that, right? And that was a huge way to transform the offshoring to opportunity, like Amazon stores and things like that, right? So you didn't have to be a big corporation to do that, and that again masked the added stability to something that wasn't very stable, and so we've ridden that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was like the information economy idea was really sold to us as the new icon. You know, the idea was the old economy before the 1990s, 80s was an economy of industry and production. And then we were told, no, the new economy is we're a white collar post-industrial society, and we're going to just have ideas. We're now an ideas economy. We do Silicon Valley, we do information tech. And for the old dirty production things, we're going to use darker skinned people that we don't have to look at far away. They're going to do, it's not like that stuff stopped happening. It's just that, we just started using, again, cheap labor, usually of darker skinned people or yellow people or whatever, like that. There's a sort of racist sort of vibe to it. And the whole idea is that the information economy had like the internet's wonderful, right? Like GPS, a lot of this stuff, but it was always these things all came out of the space program, JFK's initiation of a space-driven economy, and all of the inventions we take for granted.
Cyberspace-driven.
I mean, yeah, GPS, satellite, telecommunications, all of this came out of the drive for really having a JFK type of paradigm where he was looking at not just going to the moon, but really going to the edges of the solar system by the end of the millennium. And in putting government backing behind not just space, but also nuclear rockets. Nuclear tech was leapfrogging in amazing ways with full government backing. I mean, 4.5% of the government GDP annually was going towards, at the peak, towards the space program.
Well, there's some sketchy things. So I watched there, and I mean, this will take us off in a different direction entirely, but the Van Allen belts were a big problem until 1967, when they weren't a problem anymore. Like the radiation belts that.
Oh yeah, no, right? I hear you. I don't want to go into the whether.
But money, no. But I'm saying that it's a lot of, just like the Afghanistan war, just like the Iraq war, just like paying for BlackRock and all of those mercenary armies to go over there, money, and they built 6 gas stations for $200 million or something like that. And you're like, what? Like, how does that make any sense? I think there's a lot of that goes on, without getting into the other aspect of all of that. There's a black hole where the money goes.
Well, that's the thing. Well, the thing that is important to keep in mind is that a lot of the breakthroughs were made in the pure R&D, the science, all of these things were that transformed our economy were done through the space program. In terms of the details, it's questioned, but that all disappeared. And so the idea of the information economy was that it was always supposed to be just sort of a support for the real economy. Information systems, all these things were supposed to be a support, not the economy. It was never meant to be the economy. And by the late 80s, early 90s, when Alan Greenspan had normalized derivatives, things used to get thrown in jail for a few years earlier, junk bond trading, insuring junk bonds, and then gambling on the prices of what you thought the junk bonds were going to be worth with, high frequency trading. All of these things started using quantum tech. All of the computing material that came out of the space program was just absorbed by the financial
big finance.
And then you had the Y2K, all this stuff, but we stopped producing real value, and we started just looking at an auxiliary component of the economy, and we were led to believe that is the economy. Now that was never true, and the only reason why the illusion didn't implode earlier, because there were several near implosions where we could have blown up the economy in 1987. It did blow when the markets in October 1987 they lost 25% of their value in one day, and it was a total near new Great Depression internationally. The only way it was resolved was, again, by Greenspan going and normalizing what are called creative financial instruments, derivatives. And then that created a new set of financial values that hadn't existed previously, which sort of kicked the can down the road until Y2K happens, right? Which is another bubble out now that pops. But then right when we're on the verge of a new bubble melting down, you have the deregulation, the complete deregulation of the banking system with Glass-Steagall.
Glass-Steagall repeal from Bill Clinton. Yep.
That was Bill Clinton's gift.
Yep. Yep.
Like the last thing he did when he left. And then
yes,
you had,
it was. I love, and that's it was one of my favorite things to talk, because I had a lot of lefty friends in like the early 2000s, and I was like, you'd think they'd keep that protection in place. Nobody likes the stock market crashing. Like, I hope we don't have like a big financial thing on the horizon, right? Because this is what he did. And people would get not mad at me, but they'd be like, that typical response, like, like, I don't have a response. I don't know about that. But yeah, it took a long time to get to where we're at now. And the moves and I think humans are unbelievably adaptable. Like, we're in a situation where we're like, okay, well, we can't do this, so we'll do this, and like create value in this way, or create value like this, or whatever. And so I think we've surprised people. I think we've come up with ways to stay treading water, because if we were just allowed to like innovate, if people said, you know what creates safe, great energy? Canadian oil and gas. Let's drill, baby, drill. Like, if we could do that, people would be, it would be cheap to drive. It would be cheap to get to work. It would be cheap to transport goods, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff. We have solved these problems. We would solve new problems. Like you said, all this stuff came out of the space program. We would solve new problems. And to get back to the hunger and stuff, maybe we'd be solving it in a more, in a more fair way, teaching other people to solve their problems and allowing them to solve their own problems, export their goods, and everybody gets a reciprocal trade partner. Yay, right? That's good.
Common sense, right? Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Go there, help them start their process, and then say, have fun. Good luck. See you later.
Yeah, it's like anybody, right? Learning to walk, you fall a few times.
Yeah.
You got, your parent is helping you, but at a certain point, the parent has to let go and let the kid learn to walk for themselves. And,
right.
and same thing with driving a bike or swimming. It's the same sort of thing where, if you look at the policies from people like JFK, again, de Gaulle, towards Africa, especially, look at what they were doing. Look at what JFK was doing with Ghana, with Kwame Nkrumah. He had a workable, that was the biggest, hydroelectric dam ever built on the continent, it's called the Volta River Dam.
Yep.
To this very day, it has a plaque in honor of the memory of JFK, because he's the one who spearheaded that as a springboard for a massive industrialization policy for Africa, as a way to repent for decades and decades and generations of colonial exploitation, and help them finally not just, receive a few, like you said, a few fish from their colonial masters, but rather have real economic independence and fish for themselves.
And that's the goal. But see, like I was just going to say, here's the yin to that yang, or the other side, the powers that be, right? China doesn't want to give up manufacturing. And the places that have manufacturing now have a comfortable set, like they're comfortably in place. Well, I mean, the shipping costs are a little uncomfortable at this point in time, but I think everybody's expecting either that to go back to normal at some point. I think people really are expecting that. Or people are expecting the asteroid. The asteroid doesn't exist. It's not going to, like, humanity is not going to be wiped out like that. I don't think. Life's going to go on. There's not going to be an asteroid. It's just going to get progressively worse. There won't be diesel. There won't be, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think necessarily there'll be an event where it's like done. I think it's just.
No, it's likely. I think it'd be a bit of both. I mean, there are cataclysms that do happen throughout the fossil records. You see, that's why like most of the species that have ever existed don't exist right now. It wasn't caused by human-made global warming or human pollution that caused most. Yeah. It's just that the universe is sometimes a hostile place, and you have ice ages periodically.
Yeah.
Our magnetic field does flip, and during the flipping period, there's an increased amount of electromagnetic radiation from space penetrating deeper, which causes harm to the biosystems. The sun often, there's evidence that it will exude coronal mass ejections that could, do all sorts of things to our electric grids. That's something that, in Quebec,
I've been hearing that for years. I used to read about that a lot in 2014. I was really interested in that. I was like, man, I was so interested. Because it seemed like 2014 was a really hot year. I think 2013 or 14. And like, it seems to me now that a lot of those NASA like all those NASA articles, it seems very propaganda-y to me. Like, it just seems like fear.
But I think it's important to differentiate, because like an oligarchy will always take advantage of a crisis, and they're going to manufacture fake crises so that we give up our liberties. That's a thing to keep.
Right. Yeah.
That being said, sometimes things do happen.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm not saying
Like
that. I'm
Quebec,
saying,
like I live in Quebec,
hurricanes
right?
happen.
Where in 1989 we lost for 2 weeks. Our whole Quebec grid went down because we did get hit in '89 by a full blown, like full throttle coronal mass ejection that over flooded the grids, and we didn't have any of the. If it had happened 25 years earlier, it wouldn't have been as big of a deal because we still had more of the manufacturing base in the late 60s that could have like replaced the transistors, capacitors, and other things. And then we didn't have it by 1987, 88, 89. And it's even a lot worse today, 30 years later. But all that to say, like, there's a variety of things that could happen, which like I think that there's crises that are made artificially by empires, by humankind, which are not necessary crises. You know, like there's not an organic war. I don't think that there's a single organically occurring, like a naturally occurring war that's ever happened. There's always been oligarchical manipulation of pawns behind the scenes of every war that's ever happened. There's some wars that need to be fought, but there's no war that needed to happen. You know,
right. I would agree with that.
Now, there are other things, like we're being told global warming is the end. You know, we're all supposed to be underwater already 10 years ago, according to some of the 1989 global warming forecasts.
So
that's not
for
true.
Me, it's 100% not true. And so when I look at that, these people are held up in high regard. It's IPCC, we're using this data, and never mind the 2009 and the 2011 email leaks and all that other stuff, because those did happen too. When you say things happened, that happened, it did happen. You can read those emails if you want to. So I was a big true believer. Sorry for coughing. I was a big true believer in the global warming thing. And I looked at the 2015 COP, the climate conference, and they were talking about the ice emergency and all sorts of stuff. And then I saw the Paris Agreement. That was the year the Paris Agreement was signed. And it was like, we're going to give money to people and we're going to let China and India to continue to develop coal. And I was like, okay, if this is a real problem, if we're talking like catastrophe of a human, like on a scale that humanity hasn't seen in a long, long time, and this is the response, somebody's lying. And so I did more in-depth looking. I looked at 100 years of airport data. Do you know what the temperature increase is? Big fat, it's not. And I was like, oh, so they're lying. So when I look at that, and these smart people, they know that what I know. And I can't reconcile them being cool with lying to everybody about things. So, I mean, you're trained to, see things or whatever. And people who are scientists at the IPCC think that what they're doing is good. You're never Darth Vader in your own story, I don't think, right? Like, you're not the bad guy. So I think that these people could see real danger, but the reality is global warming is a massive, massive, not true. And so when I look at that and I see the number of intelligent people who believe that it is true and will who will make fun of somebody who says it's not happening, I extrapolate that to other things and say, what else isn't true? Like, because a whole bunch of institutions were built after the Second World War. We have been the subject of, they know about propaganda. Like the Nazis knew about propaganda. We have been the targets of psyops. Obama in 2012 made it okay to lie to the American public. December 27th, 2012, he allowed it, and then Sandy Hook happened just after that. December 27th, 2012 or 2011? No, I think it was 2012. So it was, and in Canada, news is, I mean, it's been perverted to the point of the hijab hoax, right? Where Trudeau was like, oh, we're really sorry that somebody cut your hijab with scissors. It never happened. Like, it never happened. But Trudeau knew it was going to happen. He was right there on the Twitter, right? So like, I am so skeptical when somebody says this is a truism that we must take at face value, and NASA says so. I'm like, who? I'm right. I'm like, I'm skeptical. And not to say that things aren't real, but I'm a skeptical guy. I'm just like,
well, I think for me, it's like there's a book called How to Lie with Statistics.
Yeah.
I read the book, and it's not a bad book, from 1955 or something. And in it, the author makes the point that a well-placed statistic is more effective than Goebbels' big lie.
Oh yeah.
And it's true. Like, if you can get people to think in statistical terms and think that that's their only pathway to wrapping their mind around a reality outside yourself is through a statistical line of logic and argumentation, you got them. They will believe anything.
Yeah.
And it's like statistics are useful, kind of like the information theory economy is useful as an auxiliary to doing something real. It's not supposed to be the basis of an economy, information alone, right? An ideas-based economy is meaningless if you don't have the power of production in the real world that supports real lives of people, right?
Yes.
And real energy science, right?
Yes.
Supporting lives. Statistics are the thing. Like statistics are, it's useful to make data look for patterns. Those are all very useful things as one of many tools to start formulating a concept of like a solution concept that you're trying to solve in the real world. But it's like the more time you spend, and this again, going back to what I was saying earlier, like a child has a better grasp that there's bullshit, right, being given to them by the fact that, winters are really, really cold still, like, I mean, you have people who are freezing their asses off saying like, stop global warming. We're still experiencing, we're experiencing snow in Israel, in Argentina. They had record-breaking snow and cold fronts this year. We've got all sorts of, now they call it climate change, right? They're trying to stay away from the word global warming because there's a lot of anomalies. Or, that's on the climate change front or the climate science statistic front. But then you also we're being told by experts that we, have a jobless recovery, that Biden is coming out, and the Biden White House is coming out saying we have the most robust economic recovery in history. That's actually what they're saying. And educated PhDs with macro and microeconomic degrees are actually believing this shit. When people who are like regular blue collar workers who are not working, when they're not feeding their families, they're on food stamps. Like their credit cards are maxed out and they're living under the water for, every paycheck just to not be homeless. They know that this is garbage. They're not educated to be dumb. And we've got a place where the more time you spend, in higher education, it's like you're being rewarded and conditioned over the course of several or more years to abide by expert opinion as a substitute for having your own thoughts. So the more you agree to what consensuses of experts in either economic or in quantum mechanic opinions say should be the amount of dimensions that are accepted in statistical quantum dynamics, or in climatology. It's all the same thing. You're letting go of your own power of reasoning in order to have an expert priesthood tell you how to think, and then you get your PhD and you've forgotten how to think, but now you're a policymaker or working in a think tank.
Yes, and you've been trained up. So you've described exactly how they train up the gatekeepers, and I don't want to use Polyev's word, but it is. You have an industry. Climate change is the same boogeyman as COVID, and they use different people to protect those industries. I think there's industries. So like in COVID, you could be like, I am a doctor and I think X, Y, Z because of here's the data. And then that doctor loses their license and gets silenced by their profession. But if you're not a doctor, you don't even get to stand up and say, I don't think this vaccine is working because, like, have you seen the numbers of vaccinated people in the ICU? Like, it seems like if it's working really bad. Like, and so you don't have standing in the climate circles. You're not an IPCC scientist, so you can't be like, winters seem pretty cold and summers seem pretty hot and everything seems pretty like normal. So can we just drop this fear mongering all the time? And they will say, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist, right? And it's like, well, hold on a second. No, I'm not. I can read a graph. Like, I'm just not an idiot, and I refuse to kowtow to you. So once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Once I saw the lie, once I saw the pattern of the lie, and that they have people in place to protect the lie, I was like, I'm pretty sure you're lying liars.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well, the thing, there's so many pieces of information that are consciously ignored to keep these models in place. And I mean, you brought up East Anglia University, right? In 2009, we had that big scandal right before COP21. COP21 summit, which was supposed to be the great big thing that was going to finally solidify or solve global warming by basically creating a green global governance mechanism to enforce carbon emission reductions in every nation. That was supposed to be the great green promise that coming out of that. But somebody leaked or hacked, I don't even know what it was, but point was hundreds of thousands of internal emails within East Anglia University's climate research unit were all released, made public like weeks before the thing happened.
Yep.
And it's really rich to look through these things, which people have just they've forgotten. It was like it received media attention for like
It did.
a
Yeah.
week,
Yep.
and
Yep.
then just erased. And this guy Phil Jones, who was the head of it, all revealed that they were smudging the data to try to justify the conclusions they wanted their models to produce,
Yeah.
by ignoring any data sets that they were being given from international governments
Yep.
that contradicted the warming effects.
Yep.
And at the time, Putin's science advisor came out and said, yeah, we gave them like 130 years of climate data from all over Russia, 450 meteorological stations we gave
Yep.
to East Anglia University, which is the primary university, even to this very day, that organizes
Yep.
all of the climate models that are then disseminated to the UN, to individual governments
Yep.
and universities. It comes
Yep.
from East Anglia.
Yep.
And also another one, which is Our World in Data,
Yep.
which is funded again by Bill and Melinda Gates, tied to Oxford.
Yep.
So he said, we
Yep.
gave them 450 meteorological stations with 130 or 140 years of data. They ignored 85% of all of the stations' data. They just ignored it. And for the few that they actually did acknowledge, they selectively only picked, again, the warming functions. They ignored the fact that there has been cooling. Like there's been what's called a global warming pause since 1988,
Yep. 1989.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
A pause. They've tried to scrub it out of the internet. Yep. But real astroclimatologists have been talking and proving that there has been a pause of global warming.
Yeah.
All of the models and forecasts have all broken down. Yep. And on top of that, there was like people in the early or mid 70s were talking about, all of the expert climatologists were all talking about an ice age.
Yep.
And they were saying, in some cases they were saying, oh yeah, it's going to be caused by, man-made industrial output and CO2 causing the ice age. And that's why we should shut down industrial activities to stop the ice age. And then all of a sudden, when that 30-year cooling period from 1944 to 77 stopped, and all of a sudden we started getting another warming function for 30 years, they're like, oh yeah, now we meant to say it's warming, but we still have to shut down our industry. The whole thing was, it's always been about shutting down our industry.
Yes.
The whole thing has been about population control, because when you have heavy industry and an energy basket to support the production of heavy industry, that is neat, you can have 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14 billion people. But if you shut all of that down, you're not saying, okay, everybody, we're going to commit Harry-Carry. What is not Harry-Carry? What am I saying here?
Close enough. Yeah, that's close enough.
Mass suicide. We're not going to do mass. We're not saying that because nobody would accept that democratically, but you're going to remove from them, whether they know it or not, the means upon which their population levels are maintained, and things are going to get scarce. They will be so dumbed down and so incompetent on basic elementary matters of energy science that they won't know what they're doing or why they can't produce the food or that they used to have. Why don't they have the abundance? Where did the scarcity come from? And it's like, no, you did it to yourself because you were thinking statistically. You weren't thinking about the physical reality and principles of sustaining life. You weren't looking at it. And this is what you get.
So with the IPCC, they lie with the statistics, like you said, and they pull in their data and they remove the data they don't like. One of the things that I always, when people tell me like the average temperature of the earth is increasing and we need to deal with that, right? I say the average temperature taken at what time of day, the average temperature in what location. And they're always like, what? And I'm like, what is the average temperature? Can you tell me what the average temperature of the earth is?
What's your baseline normal?
Like what are you talking? Because like at high noon in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean at water level, you're going to have one temperature. At high noon in Toronto, Ontario, on January 30th, you're going to have a really different temperature. At high noon in New Delhi on June 30th, right? Like what's the ideal temperature, guys? What are you working towards? What are we aiming for here? What kind of crazy madness is this? And like if a 2 degrees temperature rise is really that dangerous, how does Toronto and like the capital of India or the capital of any like hot place, right? Saudi Arabia, any of them, doesn't matter. Pick one, right? One's like 38 average, one's 42 average or something to that effect. If you have Toronto in June with a 30 average and Saudi Arabia's capital or whatever at 38 or 42, how is a 2 degrees rise in either problematic at all? Like, because you can handle that. Like clearly you can handle that. You can handle at least a 10-degree variance, 12-degree variance, more probably. My brother's been to Dubai and it's 50, like plus 50 Celsius. He says, but it's a dry heat. It's not like here. I'm like, so it's like, I'm just sitting like, I totally don't believe it. They use statistics to lie, and they use their people who are in positions of power to reinforce their ability to lie with impunity because they know they don't have to defend it, because if they had to defend it, they wouldn't be able to, just like the vax, just like everything else, and they use the statistics to lie.
Yeah. Well, and here, there's an important conceptual device that we're touching on, because we've talked about mean temperatures, average temperatures, that they use to also brainwash their target audience. And part of that is this idea that there's a natural state of what's called homeostasis.
Mhm.
That's just there in ecosystems, that's there in living systems, it's there in non-living systems. There's the natural order of things, we're told, is stasis, no change. And
Oh, yeah,
right,
that's not true.
and we're told every time we get an imbalance in this natural state, this pristine balance of no change, every time you get an imbalance, it's unnatural. To the degree that that imbalance happens, whether you build a dam in an ecosystem, whatever change is introduced, if it's a change, it is bad, it is unnatural. And thus,
Yep.
to be good, and you were talking about, like, nobody wakes up thinking that they're going to be Darth Vader today.
Mhm.
If you are going to be a good natural person, because we all want to model our activity and thoughts and policies on the laws of nature,
Mhm.
then what you should do is reduce the change in the system to make systems balance and stay static. And that means, like in the case of California right now, they're actually taking down, in the midst of a water and energy crisis, California is taking down 4 dams that were in Northern California that were built up in the 1960s. They're actually
Yeah.
removing them in order to free the rivers, because the dams have been like constricting the poor rivers who are suffering.
Interesting.
Can't you hear them cry?
Yeah.
Now that we're going to release them. And it's like, how many farmers are going to be
Yeah.
destroyed by the
Yeah.
lack of this water system? How much abundant energy that was being produced by the turbines that's no longer going to be there? How many reservoirs are going to dry up that were being kept by these different dams?
Yeah.
You're doing so much destruction to people because you've been led to believe by computer models that have said that the California is a natural desert ecosystem. And by having these dams, you created greenness,
Mhm.
vegetable growing zones, which should never have been there. And now we
Yeah.
have to depopulate California, return it to a natural desert, which is the way the universe wants. And it's like, yeah, according to who?
Yep.
If you go back a couple thousand years, that was all green. The
Mhm.
same thing with the Sahara, right? 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was a lush green place. For
Yep.
whatever geological reason, we don't know what, that
I have an
water went
idea.
under, and now the water is under the desert. Huh?
Yep. I said I have an idea, but it's too crazy. It's too
Oh,
crazy. No, I'll tell you in the green room. We can talk about it in the
okay.
green room, because I've
Okay.
got some stuff that I want you to watch. That's like
Sure.
a little out there, but it's in the realm of like, because I question things, and I'm like, what happened? What happened? Like, why are we constantly treading water? Why are we doing this 10 to 30 year kind of treadmill? Because like we did the First World War and the Second World War. The First World War set up the Second World War, and then we found a peace that was stable with a currency that is ending now, right? Like everybody kind of says, blah blah blah, but everybody says that the fiat currency has a termination, an end date, right? And the fiat US dollar, the British pound, they're all very old. Even the euro is what, 25 years old or something like that now, around there. I could maybe be wrong, but fundamentally, why are we on this treadmill of conflict when we could be solving interesting problems? But now we're stifling ourselves through bad policy to stop investing in infrastructure, stop investing in oil pipelines, don't become self-sufficient on energy in Canada, even though we're one of the biggest oil producing nations in the world. Don't export our goods, instead do exactly what you were saying, retract and take away the ability to sustain the population that we've built. Why are we doing that? It defies any kind of reason. And so I look into, I'm interested, and I'm willing to suspend disbelief. So I've got some interesting resources for you that I'm interested to see what you think of them, because because they're super interesting. And I mean, they're way out there, but it's super interesting. But I talk about it on my show sometimes too. But
Okay,
I,
what is it? I mean,
I enjoy thought experiments. Huh?
Do you want to shoot any of them out now, or you want me to just read them first, and then we can talk
No,
later on?
we'll have you back. We'll have you back. You and I can do another. We'll do another one after you've had some time to look at it and go, okay, yeah, we can't talk about this.
Okay, all right. Okay, that's very fair. Yeah, but yeah, it's like the fact is there's a causality does exist, but you can't get at it through purely simply mathematics or some presumed statistical analysis. Causality exists from the standpoint of principles. Like gravity is a principle. It's a coherence. It's a process that causes a coherence that is observable in reality. And what we're told it is not what it is.
Well, I was going to say, like, the reason that this, so like gravity is a good example, because like,
yeah.
I don't feel any, if I put my arm out here like this, there's nothing pushing down on my arm. There's nothing, there's no force that's pulling me to the, when I stand on the ground, it's because I'm standing on the ground. It's not because gravity's sticking me to the earth.
No,
just saying, I'm standing on the ground. And so like, I understand, and I look at gravity as something that it's like, okay, density, this is heavier than the air that it sits on. And until it hits something that's not air, it's going to fall. Holy smoke. That's not gravity, that's density. And the same thing happens in water, right? Like you can move something up and down based on its density. It's density that does that. So, you know, you can have that conversation. For me, looking at the world and the nature of the world, after realizing like they're doubling and tripling down on global warming and on all of this stuff that's way out there, and we have to believe it with zero evidence. Meanwhile, I look at things like this and I'm like, okay, density, I can prove that. There you go, done. And I'm not allowed to, we're not allowed to have engaging debates about the true nature of our world. I think that's, and like I was looking at, there was a guy who was really popular in the turn of the century, like turn of the 20th century, 1900s. And he was doing lectures and tours talking about how nobody's felt the spin of the earth and all this other stuff. And I thought it was interesting how they silenced that kind of debate. They silenced it, they made fun of it. And if they're willing to lie about global warming, they're willing to lie about all of the nature of our world that they're willing to lie about vaccines. They're willing to lie about their health and safety and all the other stuff. They're willing to lie about pretty much everything. What else are they willing to lie about? Right. And so that's where my brain goes.
Well, yeah, you don't want to, I think what happens though is that we sometimes throw out the baby with the bathwater, because we realize that so much has been lies that we're like, everything is lies. And it's like, well, no, there are things that are real and real contributions that were made by human beings who are thinking outside the box, who fought against goods. And it was always with a fight that there has been upshifts towards the good and progress. Like, that's why we don't live, you know, if it was Montreal 100 years ago, average life expectancy was maybe 44 years of age. I would be like near my average life expectancy. Today it's like 70, 76. It's lost a couple of years under COVID. But there's been an overall trend towards progress that has happened always with a fight though. Like oligarchs and slave masters never just said, okay, we're going to give liberty. It always happened with a fight. Or we're going to give new discoveries because we're bored with the human talking cows. We want them to be more smart. It's like, no, that always happened with a fight. So there have been discoveries.
And I agree with you. Like, I'll give you an example. It used to be that ulcers they weren't bacteria. It was you were worried about something. They had mystical reasons for ulcers, and like people, there was treatments that didn't work that doctors were doubling and tripling down on because that was the accepted science. And then one guy was like, "I'm pretty sure that this is a bacteria," and then he gave himself an ulcer by drinking the bacteria, which, right, gross, and then cured himself. And I was like, man, you know, like sometimes, like, yeah, man, humanity, I think we're super adaptable. I think humanity, there are people who are working for the good. And I think that the people who are working on the other side, like the mob in Italy, they figured it out, man. Like they knew, like, keep your enemies close and your friends even closer.
Well, this is what I'm saying when it comes to principles, with human societies, unlike, you know, planets or molecules or chemical, you know, elements on the periodic table, there's a certain predeterministic organization of the orbits of electrons, of the positioning of various elements, where they're going to fall on the periodic table relative to, or Mendeleev's table, relative to certain, you know, principles of how they cohere with each other, how they crystallize, there's a variety of parameters that define things without free will. With human beings that are additionally have our molecular biological components, which happen, you know, in deterministic fashion, according to our environment, the food we eat, the stress levels we give ourselves, you know, but there's a certain, like, set of mechanisms. Then we have also free will on top of that when it comes to human history, like human active conscious decisions that shape policies, that shape decisions to apply or not apply, or make discoveries or not make discoveries, or sabotage discoveries, right? That have measurable effects over time of how many people we can sustain or lose, whether we go into a Renaissance or a Dark Age period. And every civilizations have bursts of creative blossoming, these wonderful points of greater emancipation of the masses and reduction of power of oligarchs, with like, you know, revolutions in arts, in music, in science, and astronomy. And then we have periods where we see in China, in India's history, in European history, where those things are lost. And, you know, humans become more cattle-like, more enslaved. We lose the discoveries we used to make, and we go into dark ages, and our population levels do collapse. Like that happened. We got like this complete reduction. Like Europe lost something like a third of its overall population during the 14th century Dark Age. And so what's the causal intention, or what's the causal principle is, I just said it, it's intentions, ideas that are the idea, but where's the idea located? If you're a materialist, you don't even, it doesn't exist, because an idea is not like, is it there? Is it in my brain? Where in my brain is my idea located? It's like, no, you know, an idea is metaphysical. It transcends the physical world, but it shapes the behavior of the physical world.
Right.
So it's like, that's already.
But I was gonna say, and like one of the things you were touching on, the base kind of, you get hungry, you have sexual urges, you have to go to the bathroom. Bathroom's a bad example, but the hunger and the sexual urges are a better one. Sleep is another one. These are things that humanity has to contend with and will impact your decisions. And like, you get drunk, but that's your own kind of, you make a choice about that. The other ones are completely outside of your control, right? You're going to get hungry, whether you like it or not. Eventually, on a long enough timeline, you're going to get hungry. You're going to get thirsty. You're going to want to be amorous with somebody, so on and so forth. And I look at that as like, I look at that aspect of humanity as God, to a degree, God's hand. You know what I mean? Like that is the personification of the thing that we have to contend with. It's outside of us and we have to contend with it. There's no ignoring it. I mean, you could ignore hunger until you die, I suppose, but you will die if you ignore it too long, right? And so I think that that's an interesting, it's not separate, right? Like it's together, and it's together in a way like because it is human to be manipulated. You know what I mean? So like, even if you have a good leader, that good leader may be led astray by a bad advisor, or by somebody who means to lead them astray, or whatever. And then you've got a situation where we go into a dark age, and it maybe wasn't the leader's intent, but it was somebody's intent, and that happened anyway, right? And it's such, so well, yeah. I mean, humanity's crazy, man.
That's the thing with when it comes to intentions. Unless you train your mind to always look for the intentions behind the thing you're being sold, you're going to be a dupe. And you'll believe that, you know, the markets have rebounded and we're back to normal because Biden's advisor, you know, told me so. Or, you know,
people have been trained to be a dupe. People have been like encouraged to be a dupe. People have been encouraged to outsource their thinking to somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good thing that you give people the benefit of the doubt. It's like, you know, it's good to do that. But innocent until proven guilty is, I think, a genuinely decent thing to go on. But at a certain point, when you have evidence that you're being lied to, and that these nice words you're being given are actually covering up an intention to kill you and your kids, at that point, you got to do something. And in healthier generations past, when we had more of that sense, people would organize according to what was reasonable and necessary to defend themselves, their societies, their nations, their family units, and humanity more broadly. When you've got like somebody who's really well developed, right? Like, you know, who really like went through the fire of their personal, you know, development, and they were like, okay, I have capabilities, I have capacities, I have a certain insight, and I have an ability to make leaders as well. I don't want to just be the leader imposing myself on them, but like, look at Martin Luther King. Compare Martin Luther King Jr. versus Barack Obama, right? Two charismatic so-called leaders. What's the difference, right? They both use rhetoric. They're both persuasive. One of them is willing to die for his principles and also create more leaders. Like Martin Luther King spent an arduous amount of time trying to create cadres of qualified leaders to replace him if need be, Whereas somebody like an Obama is just a demagogue. He'll use
Well,
words just to stay in a position
yeah.
of being famous and having some form of power on behalf of the overlords that he knows he's beholden to, which is why he's always bowing down to his ankles when he's in front of a royal. You know,
I'm pretty sure he's on Joe Biden's earpiece as well.
Oh yeah, probably, but he has his own earpiece too, right? Like he's
yeah,
also
no, that's true. That's the truth. Yeah, yeah. So at the beginning of the show in the green room, you said, and I was saying, I can understand the people who put their head in the sand. I can understand the people who choose not to engage with the madness of this, and who are like, you know what, I'm just going to put my faith blindly in the government and in the stock market and in the job market, and like, I'm all in, baby. Let's hope it doesn't go black, right? And not to say they're going to. A lot of the times, the government is taking care of people. Like the confirmation bias of the past has worked out for the people who make that bet, and I think that's by design. But I can understand why they'd make that bet if they keep winning, right? Like it's like, yeah, man, just keep doubling through. Man, I'm so worried, and you're just like living life. So I can understand it. Okay, one last question, and then we'll wrap it up and go to the green room. What do you think of Pierre Poilievre?
I don't trust him. He really lost a lot of points for me. I like the fact that he finally got the cojones after the Freedom Convoy to start speaking up a little bit about the Great Reset, or at least the broader medical dictatorship crap. Mm-hmm. That's good that he finally like woke up and realized that was worth doing and speaking honestly in that sense. Mm-hmm. When he this week when he came out ardently supporting infusing more weapons into Ukraine. He lost again, like a lot of points on my scorecard. So in that sense, that's a big problem. Also his issues when it comes to, well, what do you do with this oncoming economic collapse, which he does seem to recognize that there is going to be a collapse, which is very similar to his response and Maxime Bernier's response. I'm more inclined to tend to feel some sympathy towards Bernier and the People's Party. I get more positive connection with the people amongst the People's Party of Canada than I do with the Conservatives. Yeah. But there's a common problem where both of them say that the point of government, if they achieve power faced with an oncoming economic collapse, is to do nothing at all and let organized chaos emerge with a new, like it's like this creative destruction ideology that the destruction that we should allow to come on will induce creative organization and good things will happen. And it's like, yeah, that could happen. Or you can get more destruction out of the destruction, and then you can get more fascism out of the destruction, which is often, that's more often what history has shown us, especially when the chaos is being a controlled demolition controlled by an oligarchy that wants the chaos in order to get the effect of anarchy, in order to introduce their own sense of order, which is, I think, more along the lines of what we're being pushed into right now. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that economically, I give them an F. I give them economically a complete F fail. And foreign policy for Poilievre, F fail. Maxime Bernier is a little bit more of a higher score on the foreign policy angle, but again, I'm not impressed by the Canadian the Canadian resistance leadership. I'm not impressed by.
Yeah, you make a good case with regards. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up with Mr. Poilievre is he wants a free speech czar. And if I were the person coming in to deal with free speech, I would use the current, like I wouldn't be creating a free speech czar, because like if the free speech czar says that what I'm saying is bad, then it's censorship just with a free speech label on it, I think. If that makes sense, right? If the person's in charge of speech, it doesn't matter if they're in charge of free speech, like, well, this speech is a little bit special.
Huh? A discussion needs to happen around that. I'd want to ask some questions. Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, man. Like, how about we use the currently existing laws to say, if you're a university and there's speech that's being stifled on your university, like, you're silencing people, you're removing comments or things like that, then your university, has some consequence or something like that. But we don't need a free speech czar to be wielding that power. You just say, hi, we're from the government, and like, see this money? Yeah. Free speech is required. Read the charter or something, I don't know. It's not something that I think that is all that. See, I say it's not all that difficult. The other thing I wanted to push back on you a little bit there, you're saying the organized chaos may lead to more fascism. What's the alternative? Are you saying that the government should pick winners and just to create stability in an unstable time? Or should the chaos cull the losers, and the winners will be born out of that culling process? I don't know. Like, I
Well,
think
that's
that's the
social
argument, right?
Darwinism. I mean, that's Herbert Spencer's social Darwinism of just like let the whole system be and let the useless eaters get weeded out by the stronger and the more fit.
Well,
Look,
that's not,
I think
no, no, I'm not trying to say useless eaters should, like, I'm not saying there should be pain necessarily. I'm not saying there should be
well, there
pain
will
to the
be
point of
that, no,
starvation.
but if
Well, I
you
know
hold
there
to
will
that,
be.
if you hold to
I'm
that,
not on board with the pain.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, you can't take the. I mean, there's certain principles of doing nothing faced with an oncoming crisis when you could do something. And I mean, I think the thing about the government, can, as a principle, government is we are the people. Like we are the government. We
Mhm.
give legitimacy to the laws and we give legitimacy to the policies, or we should, when we're not dumbed down and our culture is so mediocritized, where people have forgotten what it means to be a human. And like that's our current problem is more cultural, I think, than it is political, because our cultural norms have been so, I mean, 50 years
Yeah.
of consumer society cult,
Yeah.
like adapting
Yeah.
to that
Yeah.
level of mediocrity and unproductivity has
Yeah.
resulted in a real diminished mind moral power overall as a norm. So we've forgotten how we are supposed to interface with the policy mechanisms of government through town hall meetings, through, you know, there's an actual process of representative government that's supposed to be, you know, what makes policy. So I think,
But
you know,
isn't
today
it,
we're at a point where the banks are going to blow up. Everyone's like, people are going to lose who are not on the inside, who like, because you have the privileged list who are in the know,
Mhm.
who are like buying up hard real estate, hard infrastructure, agriculture. Like Bill Gates is the biggest, you know,
Yeah.
agricultural landowner in
Yeah.
America.
Gotta love
Um,
that.
yeah, Warren Buffett is own, you know, bought up all the rail systems. So is Bill Gates is also the biggest owner of CN Rail
Yeah.
for
So
about
they're going to
40
shut
years.
down the rail lines they're carrying oil.
Well, yeah, I mean, they know that the reality is who controls the hard reality, the hard
Mhm.
assets.
Yes.
The belief in the markets, that's only for the disposable
Investors.
idiots, yeah, and their victims
Yep.
who are going to be left out, you know, the
Yep.
auxiliaries
Yep.
and the rest. So I think that when you have that, the reason why they want to get a one world government, which they need to have this type of centralized unipolar power structure, right, at one center of command, with no nation states infringing upon their desire to just impose their model of depopulation onto the world, of a dumbed down global cattle, like a
Yep.
cattle society
Yep.
that's underpopulated,
Mhm.
is they want to get rid of the nation state. Why do they want to get rid of the nation state? Because the nation state is a relatively new phenomenon that was created by the self-organization of human beings against the oligarchy. That gives
Mhm.
us the power to break up banks. We could use the power of the nation state as it has been used in healthier times past to abolish unpayable debts that are designed to destroy us as a weapon of mass destruction. You
Mhm.
don't have to pay unpayable, illegitimately gotten debts. You could have a debt
Mhm.
jubilee. You could break up the banks that have been gambling with people's savings. That was
Mhm.
called, in the case of the US, it was Glass-Steagall in the 1930s. In the case
Yep.
of Canada, it was called the Four Pillars, that legally forced the separation between trusts, insurance, commercial, and
Right.
I forget, another type of banking. So you couldn't just do what we've been doing for the past 30 years. You would go to jail.
Yep.
So I think, like, why don't we have a discussion about reinstating the breaking up of the banks, the separation of banking functions, so that banks that gamble don't get government protection, they don't get bailouts, they don't get bailed in.
Mhm.
They, you know, you
Yep.
let them fail.
Yep.
That's a and that's a good type of destruction, because it's like, okay, you did something dangerous, illegal and immoral, and you failed at it. Now you're going to, as a high risk, you know, Goldman Sachs or whatever you are, you're going to disappear because you fucked up.
Mhm.
And those who have serviced the useful part of the economy, well, you're useful. We might protect you if you were abused or whatever. We'll put you through bankruptcy
Okay.
reorganization.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah, I can see that. The problem with that is, like, you have a brother-in-law who's in the government. You know, like your bank happened to have a
No,
brother. You know, like the bank guy has a brother-in-law in the government, and
that's why
all
I'm
of a
saying
sudden,
it's cultural. That's why I'm saying the issue is more like we're at a point where we've allowed a level of corruption to set into both the governing class as well as the masses.
yeah.
And that level of corruption has dislodged our ability to make judgments that are necessary and possible.
Mhm.
And so it's not that it couldn't be remedied, but it requires that the quality of discussion up, like the standards increase dramatically from where they're at today.
Yep.
And if we don't get that, like people thinking about, okay, what is going to be our policy for the next, 40 years of healing the self-annihilation, the self-mutilation we did to ourselves since 1969-70, when we became a consumer society cult and we shut down our infrastructure. We have a $5 trillion infrastructure deficit in the USA. We've got a $1.2 trillion infrastructure deficit in Canada.
And Catherine McKenna lost half of that money.
Huh? Yeah,
Catherine
right.
McKenna, 600. We got no receipts. $600,000 spent, but no receipts. Right? Cheaper screwed.
Yeah, no, exactly. Money is going up in smoke. It means nothing. It's not
means
connected
nothing.
to
No, yeah.
So we need to definitely have a new type of discussion around these sorts of issues and what policies are going to objectively allow our kids to have a future. Which if we just think that, you know, doing nothing and letting the oncoming collapse just wreak havoc is going to be something that is going to have a good result, we're fooling ourselves. That will result in Mad Max, and probably some sort of dystopian world order that's going to reign in that chaos. So
which is, I think, exactly what they want. Yeah,
that's exactly what they want. And I don't want to play into their hands. And I just see a lot of supporters of Poilievre and Bernier who are not having that. Their minds are just, because of certain libertarian Austrian school, free market, religious beliefs, they're not even allowing their minds to think about, okay, well, I know government could do bad, but could government also do good? What is government? Is government intrinsically bad? Because if it's intrinsically bad, we're fucked, if that's the case.
Good point. Yeah, well, we might be, there might be nothing we can do. But I mean,
I think that there is, because otherwise we'd be, you know, like, I think that we would have already been annihilated if the oligarchy was all that powerful and governments were as impotent as, you know, they already would have had their one world government decades ago. But it's taken them a long time to chip away and undermine the sovereign nation state system to get where they're at today. So, you know, I think that we do have more power, and they have less power. The oligarchy has less power than many people have been led to believe. And I think that there are some nations who are, I mean, every nation has penetrations of fifth columns and deep states within them, some to more and some to less degrees. And some have nationalists who have fought back more and others less successfully against them. I think we saw that pushback with Trump and the Trump phenomenon, because nobody's going to tell, like, people say, oh yeah, but Trump is corrupt. Look what he says about vaccines. And it's like, yeah, he's got corruption. I think his views on vaccines are stupid, but at the same measure, nobody's going to convince me that they didn't really want Hillary Clinton in 2016. Like, that was like number one, they wanted her in. And no one's going to tell me that they didn't try, like, to
everything they possibly could. Yeah,
exactly. They spent 4 years trying hard with Russiagate and other things to undo the election results of 2016. And they're still doing it, you know? So you have like a desire to survive in nationalist forces organized in a variety of ways in different countries. I don't think we have a very strong nationalist force in Canada.
No, I think Greg's it. I said, I think Greg's it. No, I'm just kidding.
You break it. You're leading the torch. And I think in Eurasia, you tend to have a little bit more courage coming out of some of the statesmen that I've seen coming out of the Eurasian front.
Yeah, Hong Kong though. I mean, that's a big. I said Hong Kong is a big loss from the last decade, right? Like that's. I mean, that's not surprising. I mean, that's a whole other topic that we'll have to touch on next time.
Yeah. But the CIA in the Pacific. But,
right. Yeah. So we have to wrap it up because I want to talk to you about things in the green room, and we're already over an hour. But it's been lots of fun, so I hope you come back. So where can they find you?
Oh yeah, people can. Well, you can go to CanadianPatriot.org as my main website. I also manage another more cultural, educational website with my wife Cynthia Chung, who's another writer with me at Strategic Culture Foundation. That other website is called RisingTideFoundation.net. Our books that we published, The Clash of the Two Americas, Volume 1 to 3, as well as The Untold History of Canada, 4-part book series, is all easy to find on the Canadian Patriot website. And lastly, our Substacks. So when you go to the websites, you also see there are Substacks, which is sort of our bread and butter. And if people want to help out, if they like the writing, the video material, then I encourage people to get the paid subscription. Otherwise, get the free one. And that's a lot of homework right there.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate you spending the time and chilling out and chatting with me. And hopefully we'll get back together again in the near future. And thanks for everybody out there checking it out. And we'll catch you next time.
Right.